Hello, everybody. Namaskaram. My name is Subramaniam Vivaduri. Today, I'm going to talk a little about. The concept of who is God. When I was beginning to make this, somebody asked me, "Is it who is God or what is God?" Interesting question. And let's dwell a little bit more deeper into what that concept of God is. I'm also going to talk a little bit at the end of this topic about what science is thinking in the same space, and see if there is any convergence of thought, or is there a total divergence or total disagreement, or anything on that side. The last topic that I have done was about Maya. So you could kind of consider that as a kind of I don't know, an antithesis to what is the concept of God. Maybe, maybe not. But let's just understand it. But if you have not heard if you have not heard the last video on Maya, I'm putting a link down in this. Please go ahead and listen to that. You can listen to that before this video, or you could finish this and go back and understand what is the concept of Maya. Because these two are perhaps very important building blocks on the concept of spirituality, useful to understand that state of God. Who is He? What is that role? And then the Maya, that the creation that you and I experience, what that is. So please go ahead. The link is down. So let's get into it. Let's dive deep into it right now. So who is God? What is that state? Now there are a number of ways, number of people call this. The Upanishads quite extensively use the concept of Brahman, Atman, Brahman, Atman becoming the Brahman. Meher Baba, in quite a bit of his own discourses, has used Paramatma. Everything that I am talking today is again from what I have learned from the books of Meher Baba and what my Guruji, Sadguru Sri Meher Chaitanya Ji Maharaj has given me the understanding. So it's basically on that topic. So yeah, a lot of names are being used: Brahman, Paramatma, God, Father, Allah, depending on some of the traditions. We tend to use these names. Also, interchangeably, we tend to use names like Rama, Krishna, Jesus, Buddha, depending on our backgrounds. Meher Baba has actually quite in detail dwelt on this concept of God and avatar, and explained quite clearly the differences of who is God, what is the concept of God, and what is the avatar, and what is the role of the avatar. I intend to do another video on avatar and the role of the avatar. But for the time being, let us just assume that an avatar is God plus, okay? A more larger role, not in terms of experience, a larger role being the avatar than the state of God. Before we move forward, I want to dwell on a couple of assumptions that we need to make in this process of understanding spirituality. Just as in science, as in research, and in other areas, we tend to make assumptions, right? Tend to make an assumption, build all the building blocks around it, go back and tweak the assumption, go back and disprove the assumption, change the assumption, what have you. Similar, and these assumptions can be depending on your need. Yeah, I want to make two assumptions. Assumption one being the state of God. And we talked a little bit about it in the last video of Maya as well. But I want to talk about that again. I'll talk about it again, about what is that fundamental assumption we should make. The second assumption, I think, if we make, which is reincarnation, I feel the rest of the building blocks of spirituality kind of fall into place. And if all of the other blocks fall into place for you, for me they have, then maybe two assumptions that you made is right. Or maybe they don't fall into place and you want to go back and check the assumptions, and maybe you didn't make the right assumptions. Or by all means, we can go back and test that. And in terms of reincarnation, yes, you need to make an assumption. There are some studies around by the University of Virginia, I think, who have really put out some papers on reincarnation. I'm putting a link down here. I have not done too much study around those papers. I don't need that kind of a validation on reincarnation. I'm fairly set in my thinking. But go ahead if that helps you to get a further understanding of that concept. So we are going to say about the definition of God. Who is God? With the assumption, and we're going to go forward with the assumption that God alone is real. He is infinite and one without a second. So that means it is only a state of pure existence, an existence of God and the awareness of that existence. And the apparent existence of duality that you and I and all of us encounter and experience, and it is in our awareness, this duality, which is the finite world that we experience, is illusory. If God alone is infinite, then certainly everything else that is within our experience, which is not the experience of God, is definitely outside that experience. And that experience is outside, that is not in the infinite state. So hence it has to be illusory. And the existence of the finite is only apparent. It is false and it is not real. We did talk about it in the discussion of Maya in the previous episode. The Vedas define Brahman or God or Paramatma as Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. And whatever I talk about going further onwards is really about that state. It is the state that is being described here, the Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. From in the Sanskrit terms, and that is the state that is being described, and I'm going to describe that in a slightly different way as the triune nature of God in the future slides. But at the end of the day, as we said, we can discuss and try and define that, but bottom line is God cannot be explained, he cannot be argued about, he cannot be theorized, nor can he be discussed and understood. God alone can be lived. Then the question comes, if so, why am I going through all this understanding? And my view here is, well, understanding is important. It helps our conviction, it helps our direction, it helps us to perhaps want to get closer to the goal once we get a clearer understanding. So hence I think understanding is important, but certainly understanding is not experiencing. I think that's what Meher Baba said in God Speaks. Meher Baba said, you and I are not we, but one. Now, listen. If you're not a Meher Baba devotee, that's still fine. Okay, you could replace that name with Meher Baba with anybody you like, any of the God that you are thinking about. Because what here is being said is that in that state of reality, in that state of experience of God, in that state of experience of the Paramatma, the duality collapses. And when the duality collapses, what happens is you and I are not we, but one. Certainly, that's not in my experience right now. It's not in my awareness right now, because my experience is I see the duality, I'm a part of the duality, and I play my role of as a man, brother, woman, sister, whatever roles that we think we're playing that because of the experience of duality, which again goes back into the Maya that one is in. So, if that is the definition of Paramatma, and if that is the definition of God, let us try and understand how the Atma, that is us, become the Paramatma, that is God. All right, let's talk about the Atma and the Paramatma and the relationship. Meher Baba is given a beautiful example in the book God Speaks, the first chapter, States of Consciousness. I put a link in the description. Feel free to check it out if you wish. So let's compare this Paramatma, the state of the Paramatma, the state of the God, to a mighty, unlimited, infinite ocean. And the Atma as a drop in this ocean. Since we said the ocean is infinite and unlimited, the drop, the Atma, can never be outside the ocean. It is always a part of the ocean. And similarly, the Atma is always a part of the Paramatma. Now let us take out an iota from this mighty, limitless ocean. Before this iota of the ocean was taken out, while it was a part of that limitless ocean, this iota as a part of that limitless ocean was also limitless, was also infinite. When this iota got taken out, then what happens? This iota gets a separate existence from the infinite ocean. Now, as compared to the infinite, limitless ocean, this iota now is most finite, most limited, with infinite limitations. Now, this iota of the ocean, what happens to it? It acquires its limitations as a drop through the form of a bubble on the surface of the ocean, as you can see in the picture there. And the bubble bestows upon the iota of ocean a separate existence from the infinite ocean. Just as the Atma, think about it now, get back into the thought of the Atma. Just as the Atma, which is in the Paramatma and in the Paramatma, apparently experiences a separative existence from the infinite Paramatma through the limitations of the bubble that you and I experience, which is that bubble is really the ignorance through which we have all developed separate identities, just as the drop in the ocean, because of the bubble of air around it, has developed a separate existence from the infinite, mighty ocean. But then what happens? As soon as the bubble of ignorance bursts, the Atma finds itself in Paramatma and experiences itself as Paramatma. So this is how the Atma, which was initially infinite when it was a part of the Paramatma, it developed a separate existence because of the bubble of ignorance and experiences itself as most finite with infinite limitations. That is really our experience, my experience, your experience, which is because of the bubble of ignorance. Each and one of us believe that we have a separate existence from the almighty existence of the Paramatma, of God. So that is the way to think about how the Atma has developed a separate existence, though it is a part of the Paramatma. And when the bubble of ignorance bursts, how that Atma becomes the Paramatma. The ocean is the drop, and the drop is the ocean. So it comes down to God is really not some person sitting somewhere in some heavens and saying, "Come on to me." It is actually a state of experience. It is that state of experience of Aham Brahmasmi, which means the state of Paramatma. It is the state of I am God. And this is the state, as we said, where all duality ceases and you and I become not we but one. Hmm. So what happens during that time? The individual, that is you and I, whose association is essentially our body, our energy, which is our pran, and our mind, we are associated with these three things. And that's perhaps one way of defining who's man. And the one who is associated with his body, pran, and mind. As an Atma, to become the Paramatma. When he becomes the Paramatma, what happens? This body, the triple nature of man, actually becomes or combines or loses itself into the triune nature of God, which is the infinite knowledge, infinite power, and infinite bliss. And that is the state of the experience of Paramatma. That is the state of experience of God, which is this three, the triune nature. In the previous slides, we talked about the definition of Brahman, right? Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahman. So it is the same, it is that definition, which is that state of experience in the state of Paramatma, in the state of God realization. Mm. And when that state happens, here man is awakened as God, and he gains the highest divine consciousness. And in this state, God becomes divinely absorbed. I'm calling it, mind you, I'm calling God. It's no longer man. It is that individual state where one is reached and become God. And he becomes divinely absorbed in the reality of his own infinite consciousness. The consciousness has moved from a limited consciousness of body, energy, and mind to the infinite consciousness of the triune nature, and realize this eternal identity with the infinite consciousness. And this state is also called as Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So eventually the aim of every Atma, consciously or unconsciously, every Atma is to realize itself and become the Paramatma, and hence become God realized. Let's talk about God realization and the various aspects around that. God realization is a very unique state of consciousness. Why is it different from all other states of consciousness? What is the difference here? And here it is because all other states of consciousness that you and I are in the experience of, in which we encounter, all of them are experienced through the medium of the individual mind, the limited mind, the mind that you and I have. And all that is being experienced through that. But when we come to the state of God realization or God consciousness, it is no way dependent. It is no way dependent on any other medium, and definitely not on the mind. So that is the unique state of the God consciousness. God realization is actually separating consciousness from the limitations of the mind. You see the intricate relationship that is there with the limited, with the mind, standing kind of in front of, between our own experience of God realization and the current experiences that you and I are going through, and the mind is in between, which is drawing the veil. It is actually sitting between God realization and us. But when this individual mind, when it is dissolved, the whole universe relative to the mind vanishes into nothingness. And when that happens, what happens is the consciousness is no longer tied to anything. Then what consciousness is now unlimited, unclouded, and the only purpose now of consciousness is actually it is illuminating the state of reality. And that is a fantastic state of experience that when God realization happens, and the individual now is in complete bliss of realization of the soul, and now he is completely oblivious to the world and the surroundings around him. So for God realization to happen, consciousness has to be completely freed from the limitations of the individual mind, and the individual mind has to disappear. There's one very interesting analogy that you and I experience in our daily life, that in God realization, and that is the aspect of deep sleep. What happens when we go into deep sleep? It is actually God realization, but without awareness, to put it loosely. In sound sleep, the soul has forgotten its separateness from God and has attained the unity with Him. But sadly, the tragedy of it here is it is unconscious of this unity. And that is the thing in deep sleep. And because the moment one wakes up, the mind wakes up actually, or it is the other way around. It's the mind that wakes us up, and there is a very detailed explanation in God's Here, God Speaks by Meher Baba on the 7 stages of sleep. But it's the mind that wakes you up, and you continue your life. And in the state of God realization, the consciousness which has been associated with the individual mind is freed and brought into direct contact with the unity of the ultimate reality. And this is the state of God realization when one achieves this triune nature. We spoke about that, which is the infinite knowledge, infinite power, and infinite bliss. And that is the state of the experience of the individual who is God realized, who is in that state of Aham Brahmasmi, who is in the experience of Brahman, who is in the experience of Paramatma. That is the state of the experience of the individual. And when that happens, when that God realization happens, and the soul finds out that the infinite knowledge and bliss that it enjoys, and that knowledge and bliss has not come from outside anywhere. It has always been latent. It has been latent right from the beginning of time. It has always been with us. And it just merely manifests because of the work that we have done, of all our efforts, of eliminating the mind. And at the moment of realization, we realize that. So with this understanding of God realization, let's move on to the next part of what science has to say here. Finally, let us talk about what is science really saying about God. As I've said before, I once again say I'm no scientist, except that I have a keen interest in that intersection of spirituality and science, so I kind of closely follow. So this is based on, this is my perception of what I think science is saying. One thing is definite. Science is not going to use the 3-letter word called God. Man, no. Well, there are a lot of things will conjure up into the mind of the scientist, right? The temple bells, the gongs of the church, the chants of a mosque, the rituals, the rites, whole lot of things, a whole lot of baggage can come into it when the moment you use that 3-letter word. Yeah, so they're probably more comfortable with something 17, 18 letters like universal consciousness, cosmic consciousness, even consciousness. Consciousness is generally a more used term. And personally, from my study, from my understanding, I can't see much difference in whether you call that the experience of God or the experience of consciousness. Pretty much, you can split hairs on it, but you will know that it is going into that particular direction. There's also a general agreement, which is coming up quite a bit in the last 30, 40 years, maybe more, that matter is not fundamental. Matter is not fundamental, so space and time is not fundamental. So if this is not fundamental, then what is fundamental? Many, many scientists are coming down to the path of saying that it is consciousness. So consciousness is fundamental. Everything is inside consciousness. Everything in that universal infinite consciousness is a conscious agent. There's some thought science is thinking, no, then what about an inanimate object? Is a stone conscious? Well, there's some difference between what science thinks and perhaps spirituality thinks. At least Meher Baba says that in the evolution of consciousness, there is a very, very small element of consciousness in even the inanimate objects. I think they'll eventually get there. Science will get there. There's a general belief that within the next X number of years, I put it as 3 to 10 years because I remember in one of the large forums with a number of scientists, I guess a question was asked, when do you think we can have a governing equation defining consciousness as fundamental? 5 to 10 years, 5 to 15 years was the general talk of what people said. So it is quite possible that we might be able to have a E is equal to mc squared kind of a equation which talks about the fundamental aspect of consciousness. There's also a unified field theory, and my favorite. I pretty much picked up this word from John Hagelin, my favorite, and I do watch him a lot. I'll put a link down in the description. Feel free to check him out. But I loved what he said here, according to the unified field theory, the universe is fundamentally unified and superficially diversified. I just loved the sentence, this part. Fundamentally unified and superficially diversified. Think about it. Think about it from the universe perspective. Think about it from a consciousness perspective. Think about it from a Paramatma perspective, about that state of unification and that state of diversification from the triune nature of God to the individual nature of man. I just love the sentence, so I wanted to put it up, and you can have a look at the unified field theory. It says it's an ocean of pure and abstract existence, but that's what I said about Paramatma. That's what I said about God. It's abstract intelligence. And this intelligence is bubbling, pulsating with energy, erupts into the form of effervescent bubbles. Well, I do a lot of, I see a lot of similarity. Love to hear your thoughts. Please put down a comment if some of these things, both about God and even the scientific path and thinking, if you have different thoughts or views, feel free to write a comment. Would love to hear on that. So in conclusion, pretty much what we said, the general belief is that consciousness is fundamental and everything is within it. And the spiritual aspect is God is the state of experience of consciousness, that Paramatma state, without any samskaras. So I do see a lot of similarity. Well, we did talk about the whole path of the journey of man from a individual triple nature to the triune nature of infinite knowledge, power, and bliss of the state of Paramatma. Talked a lot about consciousness, and I'm thinking my next topic is going to be on consciousness. Well, we talked about God. Here is something for you to think about. This unified state of God, which we have talked and described. Where do you think that state is? Where is it existing? Have a think about it. Put your thoughts, comments, anything. Love to hear. Again, I'm saying that. But have a think about that. Where is this God? Well, everything that I have said today is primarily from these two books, God Speaks and Discourses. A lot of that knowledge that I have gathered, besides what my Guruji has given from these books. These books are available as PDF forms on the internet. Go ahead and find it. I guess they're available in online stores as well if you wish to buy it. So thanks a lot. And this is the end of what I wanted to talk about, that state of God and Paramatma. Goodbye. Jai Meher Baba. Jai Gurudev.